Nobody touches the crown wolves again until I say so. Alpha King Gideon Hale said it quietly, which somehow made the entire recovery wing feel smaller. Behind the reinforced glass, 7 royal wolves stood in a perfect line, all black, silver, and winter-gray muscle, their eyes fixed on the handlers like they had already voted and everyone had lost. The senior handler, a man with 20 years of bite-proof confidence and a very expensive leather glove, had just stepped back so fast he hit the medicine cart. The glove stayed on the floor. The wolf named Atlas kept one paw on it like evidence. Nobody laughed. Not with the Royal Council watching from the observation deck. Not with Speaker Marlowe Vance folding his hands like he had come dressed for a funeral and hoped it belonged to Gideon's ring. 91 days, Vance said. 91 days, Your Majesty, and your own wolves refuse your staff, your healers, and your command. Gideon didn't look at him. His jaw moved once, tight enough to cut glass. They are not props for your little hearing. No, Vance said smoothly. They are symbols of the throne. And symbols matter when a pack begins to wonder whether its king is still recognized. That was the moment Tessa Hartley walked in through the side door, carrying a plastic bin of clean towels and a gas station bag of beef jerky. She was not announced. No one announced night shift Omegas who made $14 an hour, cleaned recovery rooms, and knew which dryer made a sound like a dying lawn mower. She froze when every alpha in the room turned toward her. Someone muttered, "Staff entrance is downstairs." Another voice, sharper, said, "Get the kennel girl out." Tessa swallowed. She had been called worse. Usually by people who used words like bloodline because personality had failed them. She shifted the towel bin against her hip and looked past the suits, past the cameras, past the king himself, straight at the wolves. Their fur was too clean. Their eyes were too tired. The room smelled like sanitizer, fear, and old commands that had been shouted until they became wallpaper. Atlas lifted his head. Tessa heard no words, not exactly. But something in her chest pulled, soft and painful, like a thread tied around her ribs. She whispered, "You all look exhausted." The recovery wing went silent. Gideon finally turned to her. His eyes were pale gray, cold at first glance, but not empty. No, empty would have been easier. These eyes looked like a man standing in front of a locked door he had built himself. "Who are you?" he asked. "Tessa Hartley," she said. "Laundry, night shift, occasional unpaid emotional support for animals with better health insurance than me." One of the younger guards made a choking sound and pretended to cough. Tessa set the towels down slowly. "I can leave." She took one step back. Atlas moved first. Not with a growl. Not with a warning. The massive wolf crossed the room, lowered his head, and pressed his shoulder against her leg. Then the second wolf followed. Then the third. Within 10 seconds, all 7 crown wolves had curled around Tessa Hartley like she was the safest place in the kingdom. Above them, the council stared as if the floor had just confessed to treason. Gideon did not move, but his wolf did. Tessa felt it from across the room, a deep answering pull under her skin, sudden and impossible. Atlas laid his head on her sneaker and closed his eyes. Vance whispered, "Impossible." Gideon stepped closer, voice low. "Miss Hartley." Tessa looked up. "Your Majesty?" His gaze dropped to the wolves, then back to her. "What did you do?" Tessa glanced at the 7 royal beasts using her as furniture and said, "Honestly, I think I just didn't lie to them." Gideon looked at Tessa like she had just walked through a locked door without touching the handle. Around her feet, 7 crown wolves breathed in slow, heavy rhythm. Their bodies pressed close enough that she could feel warmth through her jeans. Atlas had not moved his head from her sneaker. Mercy, the smallest one, had claimed the edge of her towel bin and was chewing a corner with the calm disrespect of someone who understood politics perfectly. "Miss Hartley," Gideon said, "step away from them." Tessa looked down at the wolves. None of them opened their eyes. "I would love to," she said carefully, "but I am pretty sure they have formed a committee." A guard coughed into his fist. On the observation deck, Speaker Vance did not find the committee amusing. "Your Majesty, this is unacceptable. That Omega should not be inside the enclosure." Then perhaps, Tessa said before her survival instinct could stop her, someone should have locked the staff door. The room went so quiet, she could hear the medical monitor humming. Gideon's mouth did not smile, but something near his eyes changed, just for half a second. It was gone before anyone else could keep it. "Everyone out," he ordered. Vance stiffened. The council has a right to observe. Gideon turned his head slowly. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You have observed enough. The senior alphas hesitated because hierarchy was a funny thing. It made powerful men brave until a more powerful man reminded them gravity still worked. One by one, the council members left the recovery wing. The handlers followed. The royal vets looked relieved enough to be ashamed of it. When the glass door sealed behind them, Tessa finally exhaled. Gideon stayed near the center of the room, still several feet away, close enough that his presence pressed against her senses. Not painful, not threatening, just too much, like standing beside a storm that had learned manners. Tell me what you noticed, he said. Tessa shifted her weight. Atlas shifted with her. They are not aggressive. Gideon's gaze sharpened. They have refused every handler in this compound. Refusing is not the same as attacking. She looked around the spotless room. White walls, white lights, stainless steel, cameras in every corner. This place is too clean. That is usually the point of a medical wing. No, I mean it smells wrong. Sanitizer, sedatives, fear, Alpha Command layered on Alpha Command. You keep trying to make them obey when they are already scared. Gideon went still. It was the first real stillness she had seen from him, not royal control, but something hit and held. Tessa regretted the words as soon as they landed, but she did not take them back. Wolves knew the difference. So, apparently, did kings. You think I frightened them, he said. I think someone did. She crouched beside Atlas and held out her hand, palm up. May I? She whispered. The giant wolf opened one amber eye, judged her for making the question public, then allowed her fingers to rest against his shoulder. The moment she touched him, pain moved through her chest. Not injury. Memory. A collar tightened. A familiar scent twisted into something false. A command given by someone the wolves had once trusted. Tessa sucked in a breath. Across the room, Gideon flinched. Just once. But she saw it. He felt it too. What was that? He asked. His voice had dropped, rough around the edges. Tessa slowly lifted her hand. They were not refusing touch, she said. They were refusing lies. Gideon stared at Atlas, then at her. Outside the glass, the council cameras blinked red. Tessa had the terrible feeling that whatever had just opened between them had not gone unnoticed. The private assessment room was supposed to make people feel calm. It had frosted glass, soft gray chairs, a fake plant that had clearly given up on its dreams, and one emergency exit that Tessa noticed immediately because women who worked night shifts always noticed exits. Gideon stood near the door with his hands clasped behind his back, every inch the Alpha King, except for the part where 7 crown wolves had followed them down the hallway and were now sitting outside the glass like a very judgmental security team. Mercy pressed her nose against the door. Atlas sat beside her, huge and silent, watching Gideon through the blur. Tessa folded her arms. So, am I being fired, questioned, or politely disappeared into some royal basement? Gideon looked at her. We do not have royal basements. That is exactly what someone with royal basements would say. For 1 second, his expression almost moved. Not a smile. More like the idea of a smile had walked past and decided the neighborhood was too dangerous. You touched Atlas and I felt it, he said. Tessa's stomach tightened. Felt what? Pain. Fear. A command that did not come from me. He paused. And then you. The room seemed to lose air. Tessa looked away first, because staring at an Alpha King while your pulse acted like it had missed an exit on the interstate felt unwise. I told you, I read animals better than people. Those wolves are bonded to the throne. Maybe that is the problem. His eyes sharpened. Careful. Tessa laughed once, quiet and tired. Your Majesty, with all respect, I make $14 an hour and just accused your palace of lying to sacred wolves. Careful left about 20 minutes ago. Outside, Mercy gave one small huff, as if approving the statement. Gideon stepped closer, then stopped himself. Tessa saw it. The restraint. The way his fingers flexed once before he folded the movement away. His wolf pushed through the room, not visible, not shifted, but present. Warm cedar, cold mountain air, and something aching underneath. Tessa felt that same thread tug behind her ribs again. Softer now. Worse now. You feel it too, Gideon said. It was not a question. She should have denied it. That would have been smart. She had survived in Silver Pine by staying useful, quiet, and forgettable. Mate bond rumors could destroy an unranked Omega before lunch. especially if the other half of the bond were the crown. I feel something, she said. It might be stress. It might be the fact that I skipped breakfast. It might be your wolves emotionally adopting me without a background check. Gideon's gaze dropped to her mouth for half a second, then back to her eyes so fast it almost did not happen. Safe, but dangerous in the way honesty was dangerous. My wolf does not adopt people. Good. Then this is new for both of us. A knock hit the glass. Beta Miles Rourke stood outside, phone in hand, face grim. Gideon opened the door before he spoke. What is it? Miles glanced at Tessa, then at the wolves blocking half the hallway. Council filed an emergency motion. Public dominance review in 72 hours. Tessa felt Atlas rise behind her. Gideon did not turn, but his voice changed, low and hard. On what grounds? Miles swallowed. They are claiming the Crown Wolves recognized Miss Hartley before they recognized you. The hallway went silent. Behind the frosted glass, every red camera light blinked like a waiting eye. Tessa looked at Gideon and finally understood the size of the trouble she had stepped into. She had not just calmed his wolves. She had accidentally challenged his throne. By sunrise, everyone in Silver Pine knew Tessa Hartley's name, which was unfortunate because most of them pronounced it like an accusation. The Pack compound had 3 coffee shops, 2 gyms, 1 chapel, and apparently a gossip network faster than emergency alerts. By 7 in the morning, someone had taped a printed photo of her standing among the Crown Wolves to the staff refrigerator. By 8, someone had written Kennel Girl under it in red marker. Tessa stared at the words while her vending machine coffee burned her hand through the paper cup. Creative, she muttered. Wrong department, but creative. The break room went silent behind her. 2 junior attendants suddenly became fascinated by their oatmeal. A noble Omega in a cream coat looked Tessa up and down like she had tracked mud across a wedding aisle. You should not have been near them, the woman said. The Crown Wolves are tied to royal blood. Tessa peeled the photo off the fridge. Then royal blood should try feeding them something other than fear and boiled chicken. No one knew what to do with that, which was becoming Tessa's favorite kind of silence. She made it 12 steps down the service hallway before Beta Miles caught up with her. His tie was crooked, his phone was buzzing non-stop, and he had the exhausted expression of a man trying to keep a kingdom from becoming a group chat. Miss Hartley, the king wants to see you. Great. I was hoping to add royal disappointment to my morning. Miles lowered his voice. This is serious. I figured that out around the time the council called me a threat before breakfast. He led her to a glass-walled conference room above the recovery wing. Gideon stood inside, facing the windows. Below them, the 7 Crown Wolves lay in a loose circle, untouched food bowls lined up like evidence nobody wanted to discuss. Atlas had his back to the door. Mercy was staring at the ceiling camera with deep personal judgment. Gideon did not turn when Tessa entered. You cannot go near them until after the review. The words landed clean. Too clean. Like he had polished them so they would not show blood. Tessa stopped. Excuse me. He faced her then, and for 1 second she saw the man from the assessment room, the one whose wolf had reached for her like a secret. Then the king stepped over him and shut the door. The council will use any contact between you and the wolves as proof of influence. Influence. She gave a short laugh. That is a nice royal word for helping. It is a legal word. No, it is a scared word. Gideon's jaw tightened. This is for your safety. Tessa looked through the glass at Atlas, who still had not touched his food. No, this is for your throne. Miles looked down. Gideon said nothing, which told her more than a speech would have. Tessa nodded slowly. Got it. She turned to leave before her voice could break and embarrass both of them. Behind her, Gideon said her name, not like a command this time, but like something he had almost earned the right to say. She did not stop. That evening, Tessa stood outside the recovery wing with a laundry cart between her and the door. The wolves were still refusing food. Every bowl sat full. Every handler looked worried. Then Mercy rose, walked to the glass, and pushed something small beneath the service gap with her nose. Tessa crouched and picked it up. A strip of dark leather, torn from a collar, cold against her palm. The scent hit her first. Bitterroot. Suppressant. And underneath it, something old and official. Tessa closed her fingers around it as the mate bond pulled sharp behind her ribs. Someone had not just frightened the Crown Wolves. Someone had made them fear their king. Tessa did not take the leather strip to the royal lab. The royal lab had cameras, locked refrigerators, and 3 men who used the phrase chain of custody like it was a prayer. Instead, she took it to the laundry room, because nobody in power ever suspected anything important could happen beside industrial dryers and a shelf full of missing socks. The room smelled like detergent, hot cotton, and the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look recently haunted. Tessa laid the leather on a clean towel, pulled on a pair of gloves, and stared at it until the little hairs on her arms settled down. Bitterroot was easy. Every animal worker in Silverpine knew it. Too much could make a wolf sick, but this was not that. This was careful, measured, mean in the way paperwork was mean. It did not hurt the crown wolves. It confused them. It dulled true scent and twisted familiar scent into threat. Someone had made Gideon smell wrong to the wolves who were born to trust him. "That is disgusting," she whispered. A soft scratch came from the service door. Tessa looked up. "Mercy, if that is you. I swear, you are better at breaking protocol than most elected officials." The smallest crown wolf pushed her nose through the gap and dropped a silver clasp onto the tile. Then she sneezed, offended by her own investigation. Tessa picked up the clasp. Same residue, same bitter scent, but under it was something sharper, expensive, and cold. Council cologne. She grabbed the laundry log from the wall and flipped back through the last 3 nights. Collar pads, recovery blankets, restraint sleeves, all marked as replaced at 2:13 in the morning. Authorized by veterinary storage. Tessa frowned. Veterinary storage did not run at 2:13. Veterinary storage closed at 6 because the head vet believed evening hours were a personal attack. She pulled the security tablet from the lost and found drawer, where staff kept it because the Palace technology team had not noticed it missing for 8 months. The footage loaded in grainy black and white. Hallway. Service cart. A man in a dark coat. Not a vet. Too tall. Too calm. He turned just enough for the camera to catch his profile. Marlowe Vance. Tessa's stomach went cold. The council speaker had not been watching a crisis. He had been building one. Her phone buzzed. "Miles." She answered before it finished ringing. "Tell me you are not doing something dangerous," he said. "I am in laundry. The most dangerous thing here is dryer 3. Tessa." She looked at the frozen image of Vance. He switched the collars. Silence. Then Miles said lower, "Who?" "Vance." He used Bitterroot and scent suppressant. The wolves were not rejecting Gideon because they stopped recognizing him. They were rejecting him because someone made his scent feel like a trap. Miles swore softly, then caught himself. "Can you prove it? I have footage, logs, residue, and a wolf with a talent for evidence delivery." Mercy sneezed again. Tessa added, "An attitude." Behind her, the laundry room door opened. Gideon stood there, still in his black coat from council session, looking like a man who had run out of patience and sleep at the same time. His eyes went to the leather on the towel, then to Mercy, then to Tessa. "What did you find?" he asked. The mate bond pulled so hard she almost hated it. Because the answer was not just Vance. The answer was older. Tessa touched the silver clasp, and a memory flashed through her palm. Gideon's voice, 2 years younger and colder, giving the first order to lock scent collars after the border betrayal. Tessa stepped back. "You started this," she said quietly. Gideon's face changed. Not denial. Worse. Recognition. For 3 seconds, nobody spoke. The laundry room kept doing laundry because machines had the emotional range of rocks and excellent timing. Dryer 3 thumped once, loudly, as if even it had an opinion. Tessa stood beside the folding table with the silver clasp in her palm, staring at Gideon Hale like the floor had shifted under both of them. Mercy slipped behind Tessa's legs and sat down, small for a crown wolf, but still large enough to make the message clear. Gideon saw it. Of course he did. A king noticed when trust moved away from him. "Tessa," he said. Not Miss Hartley. Not an order. Just her name, quiet and raw around the edges. She hated that it hurt. "Did you order the scent collars?" Gideon looked at the leather strip, then at Mercy, then back at her. "Yes." The word landed harder because he did not decorate it. After the border betrayal, Miles, standing in the doorway behind him, went still. Tessa had heard that phrase the way every low-ranking worker in Silverpine had heard it, in whispers near coffee machines, in half-sentences that stopped when guards walked by. 2 years ago, someone inside the royal compound opened a restricted gate during a storm. Territory was lost. Families fled. The pack survived, but survival had left teeth marks on everyone who remembered it. Gideon stepped into the room. Mercy growled low, not a threat, more like a disappointed grandmother with four paws. Gideon stopped immediately. That almost made it worse. He had learned caution. Maybe too late. One of our handlers used the crown wolves to bypass the gate protocols, he said. They trusted his scent. I trusted his position. That was enough to break us. Tessa's hand tightened around the clasp. So you made sure they could never trust easily again. His face changed, just slightly. I made sure no one could use them against the pack. By teaching them their own king might smell like danger? Gideon did not answer fast enough. The silence did it for him. Tessa laughed once, but there was nothing funny in it. You called it protection. I called it necessary. That is what powerful people say when they are too tired to say cruel. Miles looked away. Gideon took the hit without flinching, which was very royal of him and very useless. The mate bond pulled between them, warm and aching, trying to soften what truth had just broken open. Tessa wished it would stop. She wished her chest did not feel his regret, like weather moving in. Vance changed the formula, Gideon said. The original collars were not meant to cause fear, but they were meant to control. His eyes met hers. Yes, there it was. The honest thing. Small, ugly, alive. Tessa set the clasp on the towel between them. Atlas is not a weapon. Mercy is not a security system. None of them are proof that you deserve a crown. Gideon's voice lowered. I know that now. No, she said, softer, and that somehow hurt more. You are starting to know it. There is a difference. A sharp buzz cut through the room. Miles checked his phone and went pale. The council moved the review. Gideon turned. To when? Miles swallowed. Tonight. 8 o'clock. Full pack broadcast. Mercy stood. Outside the laundry room, somewhere deep in the recovery wing, Atlas howled once, low and mournful, not in pain, but in warning. Tessa felt it in her bones. Gideon looked at her, and for the first time since she had met him, the Alpha King looked less afraid of losing his throne than of deserving to. Do not ask me to stand with you if you are still standing over them, she said. Gideon nodded slowly. Then tonight I stand where they can judge me. At 7:58 that night, the Royal Arena looked less like a place for judgment and more like a very expensive mistake. The glass walls reflected hundreds of faces from every level of Silverpine hierarchy, senior alphas in dark suits, noble omegas with perfect coats, betas holding tablets, guards lining the aisles, staff pressed into the back rows like they had wandered into a meeting where their paychecks might be executed. At the center of the floor stood Gideon Hale, still as winter, with no crown on his head and no command in his voice. Across from him, behind a reinforced gate, the 7 crown wolves waited. Atlas watched the arena like he remembered every person who had failed him. Mercy stood near the side wall, nose low, eyes sharp. Speaker Marlowe Vance stepped to the council podium and smiled with the calm of a man who had already written the ending. Tonight, the pack will witness whether its king still holds sacred recognition. A ripple moved through the room. Gideon did not look at the crowd. He looked at the wolves. Open the gate, he said. Miles stood beside the control panel, his hand tight around the key card. Your Majesty, he murmured. Tessa is not here. Gideon's face stayed controlled, but the mate bond hit Tessa so hard from the service corridor that she had to grip the wall. She was there, of course, not because she had been invited, because Mercy had stolen her staff badge, dragged it through 2 hallways, and dropped it in front of a maintenance door that should have been locked but apparently had strong feelings about injustice. Tessa pushed the door open at exactly 8 o'clock. Every head turned. Someone near the noble seats whispered, "The kennel girl." Tessa lifted the evidence bag in her hand. I prefer night shift, but thanks for keeping it classy. Vance's smile thinned. This Omega has been barred from contact with the Crown Wolves. Good thing I am not here to cuddle. I am here because you poisoned their trust. The room broke into noise. Gideon finally turned to her, and for one dangerous second, every careful wall in his face cracked. Tessa saw worry first. Not embarrassment. Not anger. Worry for her. That made walking forward harder. Vance struck the podium once. She is bond-sensitive. She has influenced the wolves from the beginning. Tessa stopped at the center mark of the arena. You are right about one thing. I can feel them. That does not mean I control them. It means I noticed when your people stopped listening. She placed the leather strip, the silver clasp, the laundry logs, and the security tablet on the floor. Miles stepped forward, voice steady. The footage verifies Speaker Vance entering veterinary storage at 2:13 in the morning. Vance pointed at Tessa. A low-ranking Omega cannot testify against Council blood. That was when Mercy slipped through the half-open gate, crossed the arena, and dropped Tessa's stolen badge on top of the evidence pile. The crowd went silent. Tessa looked at the wolf. Your timing is rude, but helpful. Mercy sat on her foot. Tessa swallowed, then stepped inside the test circle. 7 crown wolves moved toward her. The audience held its breath. They did not bow. They did not attack. One by one, they curled around her, warm and heavy, until she stood in the middle of a living wall. Then Atlas lifted his head and looked at Gideon, not like a subject waiting for command, like someone asking whether the king had finally learned how to come closer without taking. Gideon looked at Tessa, then at the wolves, then slowly removed the royal signet ring from his hand. He set it on the glass floor with a small sound that carried through the entire arena. No command, he said quietly. No throne between us. And then the Alpha King stepped toward judgment with empty hands. The sound of Gideon's signet ring touching the glass floor was small, but it moved through the arena like thunder, trying to be polite. For the first time in Silverpine history, an Alpha King had set down the symbol of command before stepping toward the Crown Wolves. Nobody breathed normally after that. Not the senior alphas. Not the noble families. Not even the guards, who had been trained to look calm through fires, floods, and council speeches that lasted longer than most snowstorms. Tessa stood inside the circle with 7 wolves around her and felt the mate bond pull between her and Gideon, steady and aching, like a hand reaching across a room without touching. Gideon stopped 10 feet from Atlas. His hands were open at his sides. No command rolled from him. No alpha pressure filled the arena. He looked less like a king coming to prove power and more like a man walking back to a door he should never have locked. Atlas rose. The entire crowd shifted back, even though the glass barriers separated most of them from the floor. Vance seized the moment. You see, he called from the podium. The wolf does not submit. The throne has lost recognition. Gideon did not look at him. I am not asking him to submit. That silenced more people than a shout would have. Atlas stepped closer. His amber eyes stayed on Gideon's face. Mercy remained pressed against Tessa's leg, clearly prepared to judge everyone and forgive almost no one. Gideon lowered himself to one knee. A murmur cracked through the arena. Somewhere in the back, a staff member whispered, "Oh, wow." Tessa could not blame them. Kings did not kneel in Silverpine. Alphas lowered others. That was how the old families told it. That was how council law liked it. But Gideon bowed his head in front of the wolves and said, I called it protection because I was too ashamed to call it fear. The words were quiet, plain, and devastating. Tessa felt them hit the bond like rain on dry ground. Gideon lifted his eyes to Atlas. I locked your scent because I was afraid someone would use your trust against us again. I punished loyalty because betrayal wore a familiar face. That was my failure. Atlas did not move for a long moment. It was a very wolf-like pause, meaning it lasted forever and made every human in the room reconsider their life choices. Then Atlas stepped forward and placed his head against Gideon's open palm. Gideon closed his eyes. Not for drama. Not for the council. Because the touch hurt in the way healing often did. The other wolves moved next, one by one, circling him, brushing against his shoulders, his arms, his knees. They did not bow. They accepted him. That was better. Tessa pressed her lips together, because crying in front of council blood sounded deeply inconvenient. Vance slammed his hand on the podium. This proves nothing. A sentimental display cannot overturn formal hierarchy. Mercy lifted her head and made a sharp sound that was not quite a bark and not quite an insult, though it had the energy of both. Miles stepped forward with the tablet. The footage shows Speaker Vance entering veterinary storage at 2:13 in the morning. The supply logs show his authorization code. The residue on the collar clasp matches the altered batch found in his private transport. Vance's face tightened. Fabricated by an Omega desperate for rank. Gideon stood slowly, Atlas beside him now. Careful, Speaker. Vance smiled thinly. You would choose her word over your counsel? Gideon looked at Tessa then. Fully. Publicly. Not like a secret. I choose the truth she was brave enough to carry when the rest of us hid behind law. The bond flared warm through Tessa's chest, safe but overwhelming, and every wolf in the circle lifted its head at once. The arena lights flickered above them. A ripple moved through the pack, ancient and unmistakable. Recognition, not just of a king, of a mate. Tessa went still. Gideon's face changed, not with panic, but with wonder and a fear so honest it almost broke her. Vance whispered, "Impossible." Gideon turned back to the council, one hand resting lightly on Atlas, the other empty at his side. "No," he said, "just inconvenient." By midnight, Marlowe Vance no longer had a chair on the royal council. There was no dramatic chase, no broken glass, no grand speech where everyone suddenly became better people. Silver Pine was still a pack, and packs did not heal in one evening just because the truth had finally found a microphone. But the vote was public. The evidence was entered. The Crown Wolves stood beside Gideon, not behind him, and that mattered more than any seal on paper. Vance was stripped of his office and sent to the outer territories to serve under the very field laws he had spent years twisting from a polished table. It was not revenge. Tessa decided revenge would have been louder. This was quieter, colder, and probably worse for a man who loved power more than air. When the arena emptied, nobody seemed to know where to look at her. The same noble families who had called her kennel girl now stepped around her with careful respect, as if dignity had suddenly become contagious. Tessa stood near the glass wall with Mercy leaning against her knee and Atlas sitting beside Gideon like a retired judge who had found most of the room disappointing. Gideon picked up his signet ring from the floor, turned it once in his hand, and did not put it back on. "You earned that back," Tessa said softly. He looked at the ring, then at the wolves. "No, they let me borrow it again." That answer stayed with her. 3 weeks later, the old recovery wing was gone. Not demolished, exactly, because royal buildings were dramatic about change, but stripped of the worst parts. The cameras came down. The bitter antiseptic was replaced with cedar mats, open-air runs, warm lights, and a staff trained to ask before touching. Tessa was offered a new title, Crown Wolf Liaison, which sounded fancy until she learned it came with 96 pages of policy drafts and a desk that wobbled. "I liked laundry better," she told Miles. Laundry never required committee approval. Miles handed her another folder. Laundry also never changed pack law. Gideon found her that evening in the sanctuary, sitting on the floor in jeans and a silver pine sweatshirt, surrounded by 7 royal wolves who had apparently mistaken her for government property. He stood in the doorway for a moment, not commanding the room, just entering it. That was new. That was the work. "The council wants to discuss your rank," he said. Tessa looked up. "My rank is tired." His mouth almost smiled. "I told them your dignity was not waiting for their permission." The words landed gently, but deep. All her life, Tessa had been treated like an omega was something to place, protect, use, or overlook. Gideon had been raised to believe an alpha king had to carry the pack by standing above it. They had both been wrong in different directions. Mercy climbed onto Gideon's expensive coat, which he had made the mistake of setting on a bench. Atlas watched him notice and make the wise decision not to argue. Tessa laughed under her breath. Gideon sat beside her on the floor, careful, close enough for the bond to warm, but not crowd. "I cannot promise I will never make a mistake," he said. "Good," Tessa replied. "That would sound fake." He nodded. "I can promise I will not call fear leadership again." Outside, snow moved across the Colorado pines. Inside, the wolves settled around them, not as symbols, not as weapons, not as proof of anyone's crown, but as living hearts that had chosen trust after being taught not to. Tessa leaned back against the wall, shoulder almost touching Gideon's. "That is a start, Your Majesty." Gideon looked at the wolves, then at her. "Gideon," he said. This time, she let herself smile. Power had filled that palace for generations, but it had never made the wolves feel safe. One Omega told the truth when everyone else was protecting a throne, and somehow, that was the thing that brought the king home.